2018 marks the 50th anniversary of the infamous 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, considered by many one of the most tumultuous and violent in the history of the event. For the 68 convention, it was reported that more than 600 people were arrested, 110 hospitalized, and up to 190 officers injured during the 4 days that ended with the nomination of Herbert Humphrey as the candidate who would ultimately lose to Richard Nixon. While it is appropriate to look back after 50 years, we assembled a group to talk about 1996 when Community Insurance Center was selected as the insurance broker for the Democratic National Convention when it returned to Chicago. Carrie Cogtella, who served as the city's risk manager during the convention, discusses the risk management program she developed and the insurance coverage placed by Community Insurance Center for the event. Ms. Cogtella is joined by Matthew Cooper, the current president of Community Insurance Center, Milton Moses, the former president of Community Insurance Center, Otis Gilmore, who is currently the president of Benefit Management Group, but during the convention worked at the Owens Group, and Rhonda McGowan, the executive director of the Cosmopolitan Chamber of Commerce, who was a vendor for the convention and owned Color Me Coffee. With the history of 1968 in everyone's mind, you can imagine how nervous everyone was about hosting the convention. It was critical to get it right, and very few issues were as important as the risk management and insurance program for the convention.
But like, if you look at this, we did most of the program. We did the primary program with St. Paul Insurance Company, and we were able to negotiate the whole thing, the whole primary with them. And then I think we went up to the first layer. Umbrella was with them too. No, 5 million was with them.
No.
No, the umbrella wasn't with them. No, the umbrella was AIG. Right, AIG had the first layer. Right, and then we had Chubb come on top of them, Lexington, and then Zurich, and we did 50 million.
We did 100.
100. Okay, see,
109
100.
million.
So my memory. See, somebody said her memory's a little. Yeah,
50 million was done by the Republican Convention in Cleveland this year.
Yeah, right. And we
which
did
I thought
100.
was low. I think 100 million would have,
Right, but I do remember one thing though. What our challenge was, and I thought this is what the mayor said it in terms of the goal was, he did not want anything left over, no residual
Right.
expenses left
Right.
over after the convention
Right.
was over. So everything had to be controlled in that budget. And so that was the real challenge that we had to do.
Well, it didn't wind up being that much of a challenge because the carriers were all very, they were willing to do what we needed done, without too much nudging on them. For some reason, I guess because they wanted to have that quote, that business in their book that they could talk about it another day.
Well, I don't know about that. I think we developed a good relationship with St. Paul on this, and we're able to encourage St. Paul, get St. Paul to really kind of come out, and we instead of going everybody else approached this from the special events perspective, whereas we always did it. We looked at it from a public sector perspective, and so if you do it as a special event, the underwriting is totally different than you do it.
Well, K&K has always been big in special
events, right? And everybody's approached it, and which I never understood that. Everybody's trying to approach it from a special events piece, as opposed to trying to do it through the public sector underwriters. And so we looked at it both ways when we went out to the marketing. You can tell us more about that because you were with Bill. Bill was working a lot in terms of the marketing from that perspective, in terms of St. Paul, and work with some other markets out there. And then and I tell you what's interesting. I don't know if you were aware of this, though, Carrie. You select us to be the broker, okay? And so the insurance agency gives us a call, and they basically tell us, they say, look, glad you guys got it. You're minority-owned firms. We know it's going to be difficult for you to do it. Don't worry about a thing. We've done this stuff before. We can get it all placed for you. All right. So we had a real political problem, insurance agency. So we had to we had to do something. So what we did is we gave them a set of specs to go out in the marketplace to see if they can get it placed.
And they couldn't do it.
Well, no, they came up with something, but the program we negotiated with St. Paul was way superior to them, to what they were doing. Because they approached it on the special events side. Because they were experts on trying to hold, it's their house. And so they got the special events.
Yeah, because everything they had there basically
Well,
was special
yeah.
event type deal.
They had the United Center inside, remember when they had to do the construction?
Yeah.
Because what they did, every time you have a convention, don't forget, we had to sign a contract with the United Center, and they had to tear all those floors up and set however Hollywood wanted everything set up. and so we worked a deal with them that they would do all the builder's risk coverage because they had to set everything up. But we also had a problem that we had to get it all torn down. If you notice at the conventions, they were tearing that stuff down very quickly because they have teams that go in there, and they had to have we had to have ice,
Right,
and we
yeah.
had to have a lot of things going, be ready to go after the convention. And I still never understood why they had to tear it all up. I mean, to me, they could have used one end or the other end.
The one thing I remember back then too, there were a number of minority brokers,
Yeah.
that were in the habit of taking a position and then giving the business to a majority broker.
Right.
And I think Wirtz probably thought or didn't think that there was a minority broker out here or brokers out here that had the expertise and the resources to actually carry this whole ball. And I'm sure they were shocked and surprised.
In those days, what we did, when I looked at the DNC's contract requirements, the contract requirements at that time, we had to have a lot of minority brokers, so we decided to target market everything, just do minorities. Now today, you can't, I don't know how the laws are today.
You can't do that
You
now.
can't,
I came away with a lot of respect for you. In fact, I was just kind of new in Chicago at the time, and so I thought, wow, this is the way things are in Chicago.
started with the host committee, working 2 years prior to the convention, because we signed over 75 contracts, a lot of contracts, and went over every contract. And when you see someone's company's name up there, they make you sign a contract, and they say, okay, if this we'll give you this, but if this happens, you got to pay for it. And we'd say, no, we're not going to pay for it. Obviously, they didn't worry about that very much if they paid out $9 million. A lot of things that we didn't know way in advance, like they would send after with the coverage, and I was calling Matt and everybody all the time, because they would send an advance team in. And we had to make sure those advance teams would stay like at somebody's house or a hotel and rent. And we had to be responsible for even insuring all those rentals, okay? And one couple set something on fire. We did have a fire in one of them. But there were a lot of different things that you don't think about, like they rented over 300 vehicles to bring people around.
Yeah.
We rented buses.
Now I
to
remember
move
that
people
conversation,
around.
because when in the RFP, Carrie's the best. The RFP is basically a request for proposal. And so when you do an event like this, essentially what the city or any public agency does is they put together a document, specs that are like 5 times the size of this. Okay, so a lot of trees die for every RFP. Okay, and so when you get it, they put it out. Now Carrie's a master at writing RFPs, because she puts it in there about what may or may not be in there. So she keeps it open. And so when you design your response to it, you got to make sure that you deal with that. And one of the things she put in there is that it is not our intention to have the transportation, cover the transportation for the DNC, but you may be required to do that. Okay? And so we put together the program. Fortunately, we addressed this with our underwriter when we actually we put together and got the quote for them. So 6 months after we get started, Carrie calls up and say, they made a decision to use the CTA buses to transport the delegates. Now, can we, I said that in my specs, that you may be required to do this. Can you get this covered? I said, well, Carrie, we did accommodate for this, but I gotta go back to the underwriting. You can't do it for the same price now that we've expanded. Okay, I understand that, but can you get it done? Because remember, it was in my specs. She's quick about pointing that out. It was in the specs. And because it was in the specs, we were able to go back to the underwriter and get it addressed. So after we had put everything together, we wrote it, she's reasonable, because we changed the deductible, because we had a really low deductible for the liability too. Because the goal was, the mayor had said, no residual expenses after the convention is over. So now if you do a deductible, that means, and liability, because the claims don't come until years, maybe 6 months, a year after the event's over. So you had to do a really low deductible so you can accrue for it. So we negotiated on the buses, they're a little higher deductible, because I think the thing only had a $5,000.
$5,000.
Yeah, $5,000 deductible. So, that's unheard of. I know for that $9 million they spent, that they probably had a pretty high SIR in there for that in the current convention.
And $9 million, that's a lot of money for a convention insurance program.
I know.
For one week.
Yeah.
We had
Not even a
about
week. Well,
under 600,000 in losses, which was pretty good. And most of them were just a lot of them were auto. We had to make a requirement that anybody had to be 21 to drive a car, because they were chauffeuring around senators and all this stuff, and make sure that we had a database of who everybody was driving.
A database in 1996, not a database in
Was it handwritten
2016. Right. So that's a different kind of concept of a database.
Right.
yeah.
All right, but yeah.
And in addition to that, all the different events that went on
We had
The
outside
social-
the, right,
social
right, outside the
events.
convention
Right.
itself had to be
I
covered.
think we had 20 locations or
Yeah.
something like
The
that.
Art
Right.
Institute.
We had 20
several
locations.
Yeah.
restaurants. It was-
Rhonda was involved in the convention from a different perspective. This was before her insurance career days and executive director of the Cosmopolitan Chamber. She was running her own coffee business. Talk about what it looked like from being inside the convention. She had the contract
I had
for
the
doing.
contract to provide coffee services at the convention. And it was not just the 4 days of the convention. We started about 4 days before, and we were there 4 days afterwards. And so, everything just comes to full circle, because all of the restrictions that they gave us, now I understand why. It was because they were trying to manage risk. It was,
Sure.
Insurance purposes, like you talk about the transportation, because if you know the logistics and the location of the United Center, all of our storage, my food, my extra supplies were over at Malcolm X, which is, across the street, across the parking lot. So we had to use the DNC's vehicles, service vehicles. We had golf carts. So now I know, that all of that had to be insured. We weren't just, jumping in there, and going to get our supplies. One of the differences.
Could you imagine, we didn't do the DNO, okay, because
Right.
they wouldn't give me their financials. Could you imagine what their DNO costing now with that
Oh,
email
wow, yeah.
fiasco?
Yeah.
Cyber, yeah, right. Now,
Right,
there's one coverage
right,
now
yes,
that they didn't have back then.
Right, yeah.
This was, there was no,
And
but
that-
if they're gonna hack your mail, they're hacking mail back in '96.
Yeah.
That means somebody's at the post office grabbing your mail before you got it.
Somebody's gonna go for a loss on
I don't
that.
think even
Oh, yeah.
terrorism was part of
Oh,
politics.
terrorism was,
terrorism,
yeah.
Oh,
See, see,
We always had that.
And terrorism was more of a concern in '96, or as much of a concern as it is now, because you gotta remember, when it came in '96, everyone was concerned because of the 1968 convention
right.
and everything that happened. So there was in 1968, the convention, that's a famous convention for all chaos coming out. So
Chicago,
anybody who's young, who wasn't around in 1968,
They
And
were-
currency-
they were
SDS was out that
protesting
time, the
war.
SDS, they
It was
protested
just
all
a
the way
bit,
down from
Chicago
Lincoln
was up
Park.
in flames.
It was a
Downtown
mess.
was,
Yeah.
smoke filled and
and so
police. and
So it was
horrible.
as scary
And
back in '96 relative to now.
We didn't have the kind of protesters they had. We had
No.
the
one of the reasons in '96, the underwriters, first thing they thought about was 68.
yeah.
Right.
Everybody thought about
We
68.
had to make sure that they understood that the times have changed and that things are entirely different from
Right.
1968, from the standpoint of just the risk itself, as well as the circumstances around it. All of the political activities and things were a whole lot quieter.
Yes, you do.
My phone, don't touch the TV.
Milt brought up a good point though about the role the broker plays in the placement of coverage. It's the job of the broker to really sit down with the underwriter and help them understand the risk that they're actually being asked to take,
Right.
and help them differentiate between what happened in 68 versus 92 and what, you know, I'm sorry, 68 versus 96. And then the job would have been, if we got
We didn't
that.
have any problems.
No, we,
Okay.
There were no problems.
Right.
No, no.
Everybody was scared.
Yeah.
There was no problems.
But in the underwriting piece, right, in the underwriting piece though, the fear exists before you write it. I mean, that's where the underwriter has all the fear before you get that underwriter to sign their name to the binder, to saying that they're gonna commit their company to the coverage. Everybody's afraid.
Yeah.
And so you've gotta allay that fear to get that commitment. And then they gotta go back, not only that, they gotta go back senior management of the company. Because when you do something like you place $100 million worth of coverage,
and the reinsurers. don't
the
forget
yeah,
that.
everybody had to
About
be
the
part of that,
reinsurers.
particularly with all that sort of stuff that goes in, because you were worried about it. Terrorism was terrorism really first started around it, because Bin Laden
Right.
first
Right.
showed up in the
Yeah.
90s. He was
It just, you know, it's different areas. You're placing the same type of coverage. You're looking at your control. Well, if you're a city now, you don't have to worry. The government's gonna pay for it. We were really tight, you know. We read every contract, and we didn't want to assume any risk.
You know, that's the issue that I always got in terms of what I thought we did a great job on it. Clearly documented a good job on it. I thought the reason why we did it is because there was really strong risk management. You had a great team in the city of Chicago. You always had a great team. In fact, Susan now and your successors carried that on. She actually starts to sound like you too on the phone too. When I talked to her today, seriously, I had a flashback. She sounded just like you when I talked to her today. She couldn't make it, but so that's a heck of a training that you did. That you did, train them in terms of how they sound together and all that. You know.
But she's had a great career too, because
Yeah.
after she left the city, you went to the PBC, and then I don't know if you did something after that, but eventually you got around to
I
saying,
did
I'm gonna
not.
take care of yourself, and you're gonna take it easy for a while, huh?
Which what you did as well.
Well, that's what happens.
I don't have the agility I had before.
Right.
That's
You know,
right.
it gets
I
tough.
know the feeling.
It gets
I
tough.
don't either.